Welcome to another week of Psychology of Money at Northern Kentucky University. This week, we're going to talk about the material that is found in chapters 6, 7, and 8 of Nudge. And this is material that has to do with understanding consumers and consumer behavior, some of the things that we can do to help consumers, but also some of the things that companies do to make it more difficult for consumers to make good choices. And as you know, we have to spend our money. So this is material that affects absolutely everyone. Whether you're making small purchases or big purchases, we have to do this all the time. And so let's understand more about the psychology of it. Okay, so first of all, competing for consumers. When we think about consumers who come to a decision that they need to purchase something, we often think that the big box retailers, the Amazons, the Walmarts, those are the corporations that seem to do the best in getting the most consumers. And certainly it's very, very true that these online mega stores have been very successful, especially during the pandemic when everyone had to do online shopping. If you need to buy something, these websites often have navigation tools to kind of encourage you to buy certain products that they think you'll be happy with. So during the pandemic, I bought a robot vacuum. My dog's a big shedder. And so I wanted to buy a vacuum to kind of deal with all the dog hair all over my house. So I went on Amazon, I looked for robot vacuums, looked at the ratings, quickly found one that 10,000 people have liked, and I liked the price, and there you go. I ordered it and it was on my doorstep really quickly. So there's no doubt that the online mega stores are very successful. And even in our area, Amazon's a big hirer of our students. They're a very successful corporation. They've learned how to be very efficient at serving consumers and keeping their consumers happy. But that doesn't mean that that's the only type of business that is successful with consumers. And the book tries to highlight several different instances. And so if you buy a book on Amazon, say you bought this book on Amazon, you went in looking for a very specific book, you went on Amazon, checked the price, and then ordered your book for this class. But what if you're not quite sure what you want? So maybe you want to read a book for fun. And so when you go on Amazon, it might be a bit overwhelming if you just don't really know what you want. And that's where the smaller independent shops can actually outshine. So, here's a picture from Joseph Beth. They're an independent bookshop in Cincinnati. If you go into these independent bookshops and you aren't really sure what you want to read, they put together displays. So one of the fun things that happened over the summer is that there were TikToks about books, so book talks. And so there were book talk tables in Joseph Beth that highlighted some of the books that, had been popular on TikTok. They put together displays based on like summer reading or other topics that you might be interested in. And the other thing is these small independent shops, if they oftentimes are really good at hiring, they'll hire people who love the things that the shop is selling. And so they know a lot about their products. So if you go into this independent bookshop and you're asking about a book and you talk to one of the employees, they will know all about that book, probably because they've read a lot. They tend to hire people who really like reading. But then also if you go into that store and talk to an employee and say, I read this book and I really liked it. Are there other books that are kind of like that? Because I really enjoyed that other one. And they would come up with all kinds of recommendations. And you have a nice personal interaction. You have a nice warm feeling about the bookstore. And so that's where, in a lot of cases, these independent shops can outcompete. Now, that doesn't say that they wouldn't still be online. Joseph Beth has an online presence just like Amazon does, but where their strength is that personal connection, that personal touch, and that personal information that they can serve their customers. And it's not just right here in Cincinnati, all over the world. We have learned that, big corporations serve customers in ways that we talked about, but also these little independent places can be very successful. And so the book mentioned these Singapore hawker centers. And if you look at I thought it'd be helpful to see a picture of them. These are just these little tiny kiosks that sell food items that are very specialized. And so these tiny little kiosks may only sell one or two things, but they're really excellent at that particular food item. So maybe they only sell chicken on a stick, but boy, does it taste really good. And so, you can specialize in one particular thing and be super successful. You don't need to sell everything. And I think a lot of times, the American consumer tries to think about only the places where they can get everything. But a lot of times consumers are happier if they just have a couple of options. It's much better for consumers to maybe only have 3 or 4 or 5 choices about an item. They get overwhelmed and unhappy with that being so overwhelmed when there's too much choice. So, for example, think about a more example close to home. Why was Chipotle as a fast food restaurant so successful? They're successful because they actually don't have a very overwhelming menu, but what they do offer is a few items that most consumers are very happy with, and everyone can get that reliably. So they've been very successful with that kind of limited offering model. And it also helps them control costs, right? Because they don't offer a million different options for food. They only focus on a certain number of things. And so they can control their costs at the storefront as well. And so all of these things go back to what was introduced very early on in the book about this choice architecture, is that choice architecture can be used in different ways. So in a large online presence like Amazon, they can, make suggestions for you. Like when I wanted to buy a robot vacuum, the website recommended a couple of options for me. I could select by price point. And I could select by ratings from consumers. And so that choice architecture built into that website helped me choose. But choice architecture could also be in a tiny little business where they suggest certain items, and whether that's the book display that you walk into an independent bookstore, or like the book mentioned, when you go into a cafeteria, the food items that are close to eye level or close to the cash register are more likely to be consumed. Now, choice architecture is great, but when consumers are buying big ticket items, even with choice architecture, it is really can be quite challenging for consumers. The Truth in Lending Act was a great advance, because before that act, lenders were all over the place and people had no idea what they were doing when they were getting mortgages to buy a house or getting a car loan or anything like that. So now all lenders must report interest rates using the same formula. That's good use of choice architecture, and that certainly helped consumers. And, in these big ticket items, most of the time consumers have to borrow money. Most consumers don't have enough money to purchase a home or a car, and so they must borrow money. They have lots of options of where they can borrow that money. They can borrow it from the car company itself. They can borrow it from a bank. They can borrow it from a credit union. There's so many options. So there's an overwhelming amount of information that is provided to consumers. And as I mentioned earlier, when there's lots of choices, humans hate that. They don't like a lot of choices. They'd rather just have 2 or 3 options. But, when you're buying a car, the number of options that you're faced with is just incredible. You have too many cars to choose from, too many loans you could pick from, too many options for the car. Even if you narrow it down to the make and model, you could have leather seats or fabric seats or this or that. And so, making it easier for consumers would be great, but we just don't live in that kind of world. And so it is really challenging. And so, the book mentioned, that even when you're buying a home, there's lots of things that you have to pay attention to. It's very confusing because you have to think about how much is the home loan going to cost you every single month in terms of the principal that you're paying back on the loan. That is the paying back of the actual cost of the house, but then the interest that you have to pay to the bank or the credit union or the other home lender. Every month you got to pay attention to that, but then you got to pay attention to the taxes you have to pay on the property. You have to pay attention to the insurance that you have to have on the property. And then you have to think about what other debts you have: student loan debt, car loan debt, credit card debt. What other debts do you have? Can you afford this house? Becomes very overwhelming of a decision. And younger people tend not to purchase properties because of all this information that is so overwhelming, but also they're hesitant because they already have to deal with a lot of debt. And I'm sure you've heard lots of news about student loan debt being just overwhelming, and really prohibiting people from doing other purchases like home loan purchases. And so interest rates are rising right now. And so again, online home affordability calculators will help you calculate how much more you're going to pay per month as those home loan interest rates are going up. But again, all of this can be very confusing. Then the book mentions how it's difficult for consumers because when they purchase a property, they have to pay attention to the fine print, which is actually typed in small font to make sure that you won't read it. But if you're buying a home, you need to know, has that property ever been flooded? Has the property ever had radon coming from the ground? Has the property ever had a roof replacement or a water heater replacement or all those kinds of things? And so we do make it difficult for consumers to make these big purchases, and it can be quite overwhelming. And so there's still room for psychologists to help people make better decisions in this area. Now, consumers oftentimes can get confused in those big purchases, but also consumers are driving these decisions. Corporations, banks that loan money, they all need the money from the consumers. And so consumer sentiment, how consumers are thinking about things, matters. And so consumers change over time, people change, their preferences change. And so companies must adapt and change or they will perish. And the book uses the example of Blockbuster. So when I was younger, quite a bit younger, this is many, many years ago, if you wanted to watch a movie on a Friday night or a Saturday night, you had to go to the Blockbuster store and then you would rent a VHS tape of the movie that you wanted to watch. Everyone thinks that seems so foreign nowadays, but Blockbuster was a huge corporation, very, very successful, and founded in 1985 and valued at $8 billion around 1994. Really, really a success story. And nobody thought Blockbuster was going anywhere. And then Netflix came on the scene. It was founded in 97, and Netflix was like this little tiny company that would mail you DVDs. So you could ask for a DVD of a movie and it would, in the mail, send you that DVD. You could borrow it, watch your movie, and then mail it back. And that's how that corporation started. And around the year 2000, it was valued at $50 million. And so Netflix proposed to Blockbuster, why don't you buy us? We're serving a slightly different market of consumers, and you're a huge corporation. You'd be great to expand us. And Blockbuster said, yeah, no thanks. Well, if you know what happened, who's Blockbuster? Blockbuster has what, one store left in the country. There's nothing left to it. And basically, Netflix went on and did streaming and made it really easy for people to just, go on their TV and stream their show off the internet and then their movies off the internet. And it was not too expensive to pay a monthly fee. And then Netflix, with all their streaming dollars, started to actually make new content. And so they quickly dominated. And now Blockbuster is completely unheard of. Netflix ate all their market share. And then Netflix dominates, but now, even now, things are changing, right? Like Netflix used to dominate completely, but now there's like Disney Plus and Paramount and Amazon Prime, and and all kinds of different streaming services where you can get content. And so, even Netflix has to adapt or they may perish. And so, consumers do drive where money goes. And so consumers do have the power, and companies do need to listen. And it's so, even though sometimes when we think about buying a home or a car and we feel like we're helpless consumers who are beholden to these huge corporations, at the end of the day, consumers drive behavior. And so consumers can dictate what happens in our marketplace. Now, the book also emphasizes this idea that nudges are great in choice architecture to getting people to make good choices, but also we need to be aware of sludge that prevent people from making good decisions. Sludges are things that make a process more difficult with the goal of creating friction, intended or not, which makes the consumer less likely to continue with the process. So I know all of you are students. You probably are familiar with filling out student loan paperwork, and that is a great example of a sludge. Could we make it any more difficult for students? I'm not sure we could. And even though efforts are made to make the federal student aid FAFSA loans easier to fill out, the whole student financial aid system is really, really daunting for students. And there's a nice example of studies in the book that you want to read about on various ways that researchers have made it easier, but there hasn't been widespread adoption of changes to the student loan aid system. Also, sludges are built into businesses that keep your money. So like the example of the gym membership, where they make it really difficult for you to get out of your monthly membership fee. They're doing that intentionally to keep your money. And so, I think everybody wants students to stay in school, and the sludge that comes with financial aid is really something that we don't intend to do, but we need to fix. Whereas other times it's more nefarious, where corporations are trying to keep your money. And then another thing that corporations sometimes do is they really make it difficult for you to calculate costs. This goes back to the idea that even if you get a loan for a car or a new home, it is difficult for you to understand all the costs involved. But even in tiny little products, like if you buy, a razor with replacement blades, Gillette was genius at doing this initially, where they would, really not charge you anything at all for the razor, but you have to buy all those replacement blades and they're expensive. And so the consumer thinks, oh, the original purchase is not that bad, but then they're continually paying the cost of the razor blades. And that's a good way for the corporation to make money. Likewise, I'm sure many of you have an inkjet printer, and that inkjet printer itself didn't probably cost you very much money. I know my own inkjet printer in my house probably cost like less than $100, but when I go to buy those cartridges, every time I'm paying like $25 to $30 for a cartridge, and it doesn't even print that many pages before I need to replace it. So that printer is so low cost because the corporation probably is making almost no money on that printer, but boy, are they making a lot of money on the cartridge replacements. And then costs are hidden. So if you go on vacation and you book a hotel, there's the cost of the hotel, but then you may not be aware of the cost of the taxes in the area. So a lot of cities have, taxes that are specific for vacationers. And then there are costs that the hotel hides, like the cost of parking, the cost of a resort fee, which you can't get out of the resort fee. You don't have any choice about paying the resort fee, but that cost is not calculated into the nightly cost. And you wonder, like, how on earth can they get away with that? But they do. So again, it does make it really difficult for consumers to understand costs. And the more transparency, the better. But also, I think it's something that psychologists can help with, because we can help it make these things more understandable. Okay, so if you're interested in material like this is all under the domain of consumer psychology, and it's also material in psychology of money, of course, because it's all about money. But if you're really interested in this area, maybe you're interested in how you can apply your psychology degree to consumer behavior, because as you know, I've been saying over and over again, psychologists can help here. Psychologists can help corporations design products that people want and adapt and change those corporations based on consumer behavior. And how do we know that? We have to ask consumers, and psychologists are really good about asking in surveys and those sorts of things. So if you're interested in this, maybe take a class in consumer psychology, like our Psychology 304 class. Consider, getting more information from our career planning class, because we do talk a lot about these kinds of jobs and market research and working for corporations to help them connect with consumers, understand consumers. And there's many, many jobs. Many of our students have jobs in this area. So it really is kind of a neat area for us to really think about how psychology can be used in this area where money comes and goes from us to corporations and back again.